Today, we're taking a look at Pressable at Pressable.com, managed WordPress hosting. They're an automatic company, but they have sort of a run their own startup vibe inside the company. Spend a lot of time chatting with them. They are a WP Minute Pillar sponsor. This is sponsored content. They gave me the account with 5 free websites. I've been using it on an experimental website that I've been building for Gravity Forms, testing that stuff out. But I'm going to give you my breakdown, my overview of who I think Pressable hosting is for, how you can use it in the context of your WordPress hosting search or WordPress agency freelancer career, and why it might be a great fit for you. Check out Pressable.com. Thank them for supporting the WP Minute. All right, let's get into the Pressable overview. Okay, we're going to take a look at Pressable.com. I'm going to do a quick TLDR of who I think is the right fit for Pressable, why you might want to use it, why you might want to recommend Pressable managed WordPress hosting. Keep in mind, this is a sponsored piece of content. They support us at the WP Minute. They help us keep WordPress news going as a pillar sponsor. Can't thank them enough for their support. At the very least, check them out and give them a spin with their free playground that you can sign up for right in the upper right-hand corner. You can't go wrong with recommending Pressable, right? At the end of the day, it is an automatic company, though they do run like their own independent startup within Automatic. They are associated with the biggest brand of WordPress that there is, Automatic, which runs WordPress.com and a dozen plus other products created by the Automatic team. This is a fantastic hosting solution for your business owners, for middle-sized brands and middle-sized organizations that really just want to have a competent solution. You're not looking for all the bells and whistles. You don't need fancy stuff. You just want great support with great hosting options. I don't think you can go wrong with recommending and using Pressable. We're going to get into some of those features in this video, and I also wrote about it in the blog post at the WP Minute. It is like hiring IBM back in the early 90s or late 80s. No one got fired from recommending IBM. It was just a solid choice. And I think Pressable brings that to the table. Let's take a look at the pricing so you can see where this starts off at. Scroll down a little bit. They default it to actually it's because I was clicking on this before. When you first look at the pricing page, it defaults to this $25 a month, which includes Jetpack Security Daily, which you hover over all of the applications that you launch here at Pressable. They're going to come with Jetpack installed unless you're maybe on that very entry-level plan. But the one that I'm using in the demo is with Jetpack Security. And for $25 a month, it is right on par with what everyone else is charging in the managed WordPress space. If you do sign up for a year, you get it for $20 a month or $250 for the year. But if you're just starting out, maybe it's your first time getting into WordPress and launching your first site, I mean, for $190 a year, if you scoop up the yearly plan, I mean, it's a pretty dang good value. And if you have a small site that's getting very few visits a month, I don't think you can go wrong with that price point. You're not going to get Jetpack Security Daily. You're still going to get all the support and protection you need from core Pressable. You're just not going to get the Jetpack side of it. And I think that's okay, in my book. And then if you want to start to go up, you start to have a handful of sites, or you're a freelancer and you're managing sites for your clients, $37 a month, again, on that yearly plan is always the best value. In my opinion, if you can buy the year. So their price points are very on par with everyone else. And this pricing grid actually illustrates the fact that you can start very small at Pressable, and they have the horsepower and the competency and the infrastructure to host very large sites. Again, remember, automatic company. There's resources and knowledge and infrastructure available to them. $675 a month if you're starting to push beyond 2 million visits. As somebody who worked at a hosting company, well, almost all of my professional career, but in the last 5 years worked at a WordPress hosting company, that is a really good value for that size of traffic. Honestly, if you start looking at enterprise plans, I'm sure they can custom quote you one, but $675 a month for 2 million page views is really darn aggressive. And, going to be a reliable company. Again, automatic support team. Pressable, that's the pricing. You can look at the pricing grid to get all of the breakdown of the different things you're going to get with them. You really start to bump up to this $90 a month to get support, Slack, channel, and I think that's a really cool value. I don't see any other host doing that. Let's dive into some of the features that sets Pressable apart. So I'm just going to click on their drop down. It's the easiest way to see all of the features in one snapshot. There's a ton of features here. A lot of them are on par with what other hosts do, but there's two that stand out that you might think of them as throwaway, but I do want to highlight them because I think it's important. So number one, Titan Professional Email. A few years ago, Automatic acquired a professional email solution, managed email provider, and I think this is what I would assume this is where the resources come for that. It's very rare to see a managed WordPress host have email included. So many of them point to and actually have tools to just connect to Google Apps as like the default email provider. It's kind of refreshing to see that they're actually supporting email here because, again, if you're that freelancer or agency, which is how I look at this and who I recommend this the most to, if you're that person, you don't want to recommend just the hosting to your customer. You want to also recommend email. Google Apps is no longer free. They charge. And to get a hold of support at Google, good luck, especially if you're just a small business owner with 1 or 2, 3 email accounts. You're rarely ever going to have access to talk to anybody. And a managed host that does email is just going to be a one-stop shop for your client. And I think that's where you want to look at this is, what's the best solution for my client as a freelancer or as an agency that I can recommend? And, as you might just disregard email, I think it's very important, especially if you're selling to small businesses. We'll dive into a lot of the nuances about the rest of Pressable when I show off the dashboard. But free Jetpack security, that's fantastic. Every app comes with Jetpack installed, and you can set it up when you set up your WordPress websites with Pressable. Look, love it or hate it, Jetpack, again, automatic product. So, of course, we're going to see it here in the Pressable lineup. I think if, again, you're a small business, Jetpack is where it shines because let's just take a look at a few things that it does really well. Security, check. Speed, check, because you have their CDN delivery for images and optimizing images. And they have things like stats. Again, if you're setting this up for a small business, I've launched a bunch of little WordPress websites that I use as just like little experimental things or little portfolio sites. I don't go set up Google Analytics. I don't even set up my Fathom account because I don't want to use up my seats. I just use a Jetpack stats. And, for a small business, it's going to just tell them where they're coming from, what their visits look like. I don't think you can go wrong with recommending Jetpack at the smaller level. Those of you who are worried about performance, well, Pressable is going to fine tune it for you. So I don't think you have to really worry about performance on the Pressable stack when you're using Jetpack. There's a bunch of other things here that Pressable does, which is very on par with a lot of managed WordPress hosts. So I'm not going to go through every single one. Free managed migrations is awesome. Again, if you're a freelancer or an agency, depending on which plan you purchase, it will come with a certain set of migrations. It's so easy to just say, hey, I'm helping out a client. I don't have time to migrate. I don't want to worry about that stuff. Let the Pressable team do it. Why not? You can do it for free. It's fantastic stuff. Free daily backups. All right, let's take a look at using the Pressable dashboard. Okay, here we are at the Pressable dashboard. And remember, the way that I'm looking at this overview of Pressable and why I would recommend it is if you're a freelancer or an agency and you're working in a B2B environment, maybe a small business environment. Maybe you're working with mid-level management and a marketing team at a bigger organization, and you're recommending Pressable. I think the Pressable dashboard is fantastic, very easy to use, very easy to understand, and they have a lot of what I'll call maintenance and management stuff already solved for you, which makes your life a little bit easier, especially when you're working with clients or especially when you're working with another set of teams, like an IT team, an IT director, your boss, marketing team versus the IT team. I think a lot of this stuff is solved with Pressable. It's not going to blow your socks off. It's not going to be super fancy and a lot of graphs and a lot of colors and animations. But I think that's the pleasant part of using Pressable. It's a very familiar interface. Why would I spend so much time talking about a dashboard? Because dashboards are important. As somebody who has been in the hosting space for a long time, or was in the hosting space at a long time, and then a podcast hosting space for a while, it's important to know where all the things are so that users are not frustrated, they're not creating support tickets, they're not breaking things that they shouldn't be breaking. Having a well-designed dashboard isn't just the good-looking stuff, but it's the familiar stuff. It's the stuff that you have access to. Okay, so on the left-hand side, you can navigate to all of your sites, which is what we're looking at now, clearly labeled when they're staging sites, when they're production sites. You can get to your collaborators. Again, very important when you're working within a team to set up collaborators to have certain access. Let's going to click on that for a second. You can get really granular with the access and the permissions that you give folks on your Pressable dashboard. You can give them access to WordPress. You can give them access to cloning sites. You can take away all the access, and they only have access to billing, right? If you're setting up like a finance team. So I really appreciate the collaborator configuration here. Other host is sort of just like one or two options. You have access to this, you don't have access to that, but you can get really granular with Pressable. And again, this is why I think that in the agency setting and in, the middle size brand team setting, you're just one of many people, Pressable does a fantastic job. You can set up your email hosting if you want to set that up. I don't have that set up on my demo. Usage and reports. Let me just hit on these two really quick because I think they're very important. This is what I mean about Pressable not having all of the bells and whistles and all of the fancy graphics, but I so appreciate this text-driven approach to reports because I can quickly see exactly to the decimal of what I'm using in my hosting account, what all the sites are using, from storage to unique visits. And this is super important when I'm reporting to my clients, reporting to the rest of the team. And speaking of reporting, you can actually run reports to send to other folks like your customers and again, like your team to see the important things. So let's say you're a webmaster for a brand, you're using Pressable, and your CTO says, okay, we have this all hands meeting coming up. We need to run a report on our DNS records. Where are WordPress sites pointing to? Who has access to that? How many people have access to it from a collaborator's perspective, and how much bandwidth and storage are they running? Because we need to look at costs and stuff like that. You can run these reports really easy without the hassle of extracting, stats from the dashboard that aren't set up for that kind of thing. Or what drives me nuts with some hosting plans or accounts is you have these fancy graphs. They look great. It's so awesome. They look cool. But then you're stuck like hovering over, the line graph trying to find the exact report. Pressable just gives it to you in raw data. Really love it. Billing, straightforward. I'm not going to click on that because I don't want to have to filter anything out in my video edit. API applications and API documentation if you're doing some more advanced things with Pressable as a developer. But generally, 99% of the time, you'll be working out of this overall sites dashboard. Speaking of the sites dashboard, very straightforward. You can expand these individual sites, and you can click into them to manage them and do all of the fun stuff that you normally would with management. I want to talk about two things specific to Pressable that I really appreciate. First and foremost, you have this WP dashboard link and this OnePress login. OnePress login will bring you right into the site without having to log in. So you can click that and it brings you into the site. Or if you click the WP dashboard link, it's going to bring you just to the dashboard. Of course, I'm already logged in. If I wasn't logged in, it would bring me to the dashboard login, and then I would have to log in with any account that I have. The OnePress login is a lifesaver if you don't know your WordPress admin. But speaking of, and we'll see it in a moment when I set up a site, change the WordPress admin password interface right here is another fantastic lifesaver, because when you create a site, it will email you the password once you set it up. And what happened to me the first time is when I started testing out Pressable, I set up my site and then I left for the day, totally forgot about it. I think it was like a Friday. I didn't come back to it until the weekend. I was like, wait a minute, what's my login again? How do I log into this site? I totally forgot my password, and I think I had deleted the emails. I can just change it right here and generate a new password, and it makes life so easy. And I really love that. It's a nice little touch to the admin interface. The other thing is, too, when you're working with groups of people, or if you're cloning and staging sites, and we'll talk about that in a moment, you can create notes. You can say this is a test, making some new deploys, and then create that note. And that'll apply that note right here. This is a test making some new deploys. Here's the timestamp. Here's who did it last updated. And these notes will just carry on through these through the life of each individual WordPress website. So when you're making these changes, especially if you're making changes for customers or customer requests, that kind of thing, it's very important to have these changes documented, because you're going to forget a year later if you installed a new plugin or tried a new theme, and then you don't talk to that customer for a long time. You come back, what did I do? It's all right here. And again, I really, really appreciate that. Everything else is pretty straightforward. You have access to your domains. You can go into the performance report, which will show you, again, your standard level stuff, unique visits, storage, etc. Very straightforward and easy to use. Backups and restores, you can have access to all of that stuff. And logs is really cool because this site doesn't get a lot of traffic, so we're not going to see too much. But having logs right here is another admin lifesaver. Like, you can search logs. If something's happening or a customer saying, hey, I can't get to my site, you can look at the logs really quick, search and filter things, and get access to this stuff on the fly without having to log in an SSH and do all that fun stuff. I know that's not so much of a big deal for a lot of people, but if you're talking about dozens or hundreds of sites, depending on how many sites you host, that's a real time saver, and it just is such a huge help to anyone who's a server or web admin. All right, let's quickly create a site so you can see how that goes. Up top, I'll click on Add Site. You have to name the site. Now, this is kind of like an internal name, so you don't have to, it's not like set in stone, but it does have a certain formatting that you need. Period, spaces, and other special characters are not permitted, so actually I got to get rid of that. We'll go WP Minute Test 2. You can set WordPress or WooCommerce as your default sort of site type. Which PHP version you'd like to use. Do you need this to be a staging site? And then you can select which data center, which again, I really appreciate, and then hit create. And that's all you have to do. Once you click on that, it's going to spin all that stuff up in the back end and then send you an email once the site is deployed. It's really that easy. And then you can go in and start managing. As you saw me use the dashboard throughout the rest of this video. Let's talk about the one thing that I think is a bit of a hiccup, maybe not as much as a speed bump in the Pressable land, but certainly a hiccup, and that is staging versus cloning and going from staging to production. Now, you can see here I have two apps. When I was testing this stuff out, I have two staging sites. I'm going to click into one of the production sites here, and you'll see up top I can either clone or set up staging. They're both doing the same thing. They're both getting to the same point. Let's take a look at the clone. So if I create a new clone, you can actually say, hey, is this going to be cloned as a staging site, or are we just cloning a site? And look, this is not solved across the board for a lot of web hosts. This is one of the very, this is the nuance of cloning and staging that each host has that sets them apart a little bit differently. And I think where Pressable wins is you have two separate things. I can easily clone and easily set up staging, but they don't have a quick from staging to production. It's not a one-click effortless thing, and I'll show that in a moment. But cloning is to clone the site. And if you're an agency or a freelancer and you're building out, you have a certain way you build out a WooCommerce site, a certain way you build out a marketing site, you can clone these sites really quick. So we'll say Mac clone. I'm not going to do it as a staging site. I like the fact that I can set a data center. Let's go Washington, D.C., because that's the closest. You can just quickly clone these sites, and clone sites are really meant to be for a production site. So again, you can build your own WordPress website, have a nice little template, if you will, of themes and plugins you always use. And when a new customer comes along, or there's a new request for a microsite or something like that in your organization, you just clone it. Clone it, and then you set a production domain on top of it, and all is good. And then you would create a staging site out of that clone. Let's just take a look at the staging site. There's a few less options here because typically what you'll be doing is developing on this and then moving this to production. The problem is there is no, you want to convert it to a live site. There is no easy way to do that. So if I go to convert to site, convert site, it's going to do all these things in the background to prepare it to be used as a live site. But you then have to go into domains and set up a primary domain. Now, I know that's a little bit confusing because it is. Let's say I wanted to make a staging site of this form.wtf. I have to go into the domain here and then delete this primary domain and then give that primary domain back to the one that I actually want to be a production site. So it says, look, it was cloned from form.wtf. Now I would take the primary domain and put it here. And that's how you kind of quote unquote deploy a site. It's not seamless. Their documentation even highlights that. Like, we don't have a pure one-click from staging to production, but that's how you do it. You would just swap domains. I don't really love it. It's not that bad, but if you're, handing this off to somebody else on your team, or, you're training somebody else, you could feel like, oh God, I got to delete my primary domain. That's kind of scary. And I'm doing that in production. Is that a seamless swap over in terms of live traffic? There's all kinds of things you have to kind of think about when you're going from production to live, from staging to live. And I don't really love it, but it is a trade-off, because I do like the fact that you can easily clone and create these staging sites. It's just that little hiccup there to go back and forth. At the end of the day, I still really love Pressable. I would certainly use it and recommend it to anyone else looking at setting up a managed WordPress host. Again, I haven't run into any issues testing this stuff out. I have a few small sites I actually am sending live traffic to, this particular form.wtf site as a Gravity Forms experiment. And I haven't had any issues. And I think that if you're working with clients, if you're working with agencies, or you are an agency working with bigger brands, you're going to be in fantastic hands with Pressable. I would certainly recommend it. Check out Pressable.com. You can go and check out that playground if you want to experiment on your own without signing up. You can check out the playground and play with all of the stuff that you saw here today.